Hi, everyone. I'm JoAnn Perry, and I'm here with Tec Clark. Hi, Tec.
Hey, how are you?
Today, I wanted to ask you and talk to you. The first time we talked on the phone, and
Yeah,
we were really talking about things that we thought could be better in the industry, and
yeah.
and mostly it circled around instructor
hmm
training. So, talk to me. Let's talk a little bit about what we talked about that day.
Yeah, well, I think the big thing is that, we've got a relatively young industry, if you think about it, coming out of the 50s, military into recreational. And then where we are today is that we've had generations. We've got the kind of great-grandfather type of situation now where we're looking at, the instructors of the 50s have beget the instructors of which are mostly the boomers of the 80s, and now we're into almost our third and fourth generation, if you will, on the professional cycle. And so in that time, we've had massive advancements in standards, in safety, and so many things within the industry and the agencies leading that. And of course, Dan coming along and being a strong player on the safety advocacy piece of that as well. But, I think where we look at it is that although we can say things are really, always evolving and buttoning up on the standards and the training side of the house, at the same time, we are seeing where the barriers of entry that have been put into place so that scuba can be more lucrative and more people can get into the activity, those pulling down barriers of entry start to almost water down standards by comparison to previous generations. And so when we see that, we get to notice that on courses that used to be a certain duration or have a certain amount of skills, they are reduced down. Now, the funny thing is, though, is that the amount of skills that we're actually requiring students to do today, and I'm going to stick with open water, those requirements, the number of skills is really very similar to what it's been for 30, 40, 50 years. The thing is, the time allotment for it has come down. And when we start to look at that squeezing in of the time, that's where we start to see that individuals aren't as accomplished when they come out of training as they may have been years ago. And so, for example, if you're trying to get 93 skills in a 3-day scuba course, just on the water side of the house, and confined water specifically, what is taking place there? It basically means that we have to hit 93 skills with mastery, but some of those skills we're only doing one time. Where is the mastery in the one time? And then where do we do the kind of variations, skill repeats and variations? It might say it in the standard that says you should do a review, but it doesn't list what should be reviewed. So what are we really talking about? Where is the repetition and where is the variation? So if we look at mask clearing, we're going to have the variations of a mask clear, a partial, a full, a remove and replacement, no mask swim. We're going to have different variations like that. But if it only stops with that, or if the individual hasn't mastered it, we're not doing our jobs as professionals. And I think what's happening is that the sake of the business side has pulled back on the mastery side, which means that when we kind of high-five that student after they did their mask clear the first time, is that true mastery? Because if that student was shaking while they did that clear, or they had to give you the hang on, let me catch my breath, and they're doing their whole breathing, yeah, and then here it comes, and then, that's very questionable about if that's mastery or not.
Yeah.
So is it repeatable? Is it repeatable with comfort and control? Sometimes it's not, especially when we go through these things that are high-fiving quickly to get through pool training to then get into the open water and so forth. I use that example because if you think about that, that is the foundation. So now, if that student has gone through this type of training and they come out and they are not very comfortable, they're probably not going to tell their instructor. They're going to high five their instructor and write up great things on social media that this was the best instructor ever. But deep down inside, they know they're not good with equalizing. They know they're not good with mastering their neutral buoyancy. And they know they don't want to ever do a mask clear again. So what does that mean for them moving forward? And then when they do move forward, what does it mean for the next class and the next class and the next class? So as we can look at like how these have all changed, so has the instructor training. And now if you've got an instructor that knows that that is the way you train and they were brought up that way and now they are an instructor, they're going to do the same. And this is where I believe that we really have a burden to share more in instructor training that is not just the black and white of the standards, not just the black and white of the slate that we're going to do in our pool session, but it's more than that. And I think that we have reduced ourselves down to a dive professional at the instructor level being to the point where that's all they know to do. And that can have some negative consequences. And I believe that if we want to thrive as an industry, we really need to pour in more onto the training side. We need to have instructors that understand what's going on in the educational sense, especially in skill development, and to be able to recognize that what we might be doing in getting a student through a class might not be actual mastery. They got a C card at the end of the class, but does it mean that they are competent and qualified and comfortable? All of those catchwords that we like to say that are in the standards, but are they? So that's why I think that, the big piece about continuing education for instructors is where we kind of look at how can instructors that have left an instructor course, where do they keep getting trained after that? Or are they going, I'm good. I got my instructor card, I got my slates, I got my standards, and it's time to go to work. I think there's more out there. And that was our original conversation. Yeah. I was so excited because you were nodding your head and I was like, yes, we see a lot of the same things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I think about training instructors, too often we get into exactly like you say, too often we say, here is the skill and this is what they need to do to perform it. Mm-hmm. And we forget about what was the objective. At the end of the day, the objective of the mask skill you're describing is I want my student that if their mask gets kicked off, they go, oh, dang it.
Exactly.
And then they find it and they put it back on.
Exactly.
It's not an event other than, all right, fix it and move on. It's not something they spend time on. The objective is not, I can clear a fully flooded mask. It's that when it happens in the wild, it doesn't bother them at all. Right. That's the objective, and that's what we forget. And that's what we forget to tell our instructors is go back to ultimately what we want is that the event is not a big deal.
Right.
I tell my students all the time, we drop on down that very first night, you take your first few breaths on scuba. Guess what? You're a scuba diver.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about the rest of the class. We're going to talk about if this happens, how do I fix it?
Yeah.
If this happens, how do I fix it?
Yeah.
And
I like that.
Becoming a scuba diver is easy. It's knowing how to keep yourself safe.
Exactly.
That is what we should spend the rest of the class on.
Exactly.
And I think you're right. I think we land on you've met this sentence in the standards versus you have met the objective of being safe and confident at the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
It is.
I see a lot of people, like you say, that finish their instructor class and then go years and years without continuing education. Yeah. Okay, so we when you and I sat down, we talked about the program that you have, and we said the first year what we wanted to work on was liability.
Yeah.
So talk to me about why you think that was the first thing you and I chose to go after.
Well, it's the one that I want to say is kind of the most sparse of what you see in instructor development and training. We'll have a module on risk management, and it will have kind of the classic and much needed things, of course, that are in there. But at the same time, we're talking about a world that is very distant to our pros that are out there. And, myself included. And the only time that I really embraced what the standards meant and what I had been trained up to do in an academic institution with, 15-week scuba classes and things like that, yes, I knew I was prepared a lot more than somebody else maybe at that same certification level. But at the instructor level, it didn't sink in until I actually got into forensics. And the forensic diving accident investigation was the biggest eye-opener there was. Being a national training director, a national director of a scuba training organization, that also brings forth cases across your decks, incident reports. And you're just looking at these and you're kind of processing it, going, how did that happen? And how do we need to be more clear in our standards that doesn't happen again? What are we missing that the instructor interpreted that scenario and said that was okay to go with? Were we not clear enough in the standards for that? Well, then it goes to the point of forensics and the forensic investigation. And that's where we start to look at that a dive accident has that pathology to it. It doesn't just happen. It starts back here. And when we start to look at that, almost every dive accident had a precipitating event that was way beforehand. And it could be a variety of things. But when you have a thing that winds up maturing over time, and then here we go, and there's the terminal incident, whatever that is, how did we not know back here that this was an issue? And I think that there's a piece of it that people don't know what they don't know. And until you're exposed to some of the harder side of what our industry has, you don't really think about it that much. Cases and scenarios really aren't played out heavily within the instructor training. Now, you can come to DEMA and you can get all kinds of training on different risk management topics, and they'll do all kinds of scenarios and cool stuff like that. But, you're just not seeing it at the instructor level. So when they come out of that class and then they perform and they start to do their classes, let's say they interpreted a black and white standard that is, pretty clear about depth and pretty clear about the skills that you need to do and so forth. But where it's not clear, there's not a standard for current. There's not a standard for visibility. There's not a standard for the water temperature. You see, so it's not that crystal clear, which means that the instructor has to dig into their own personal experiences and kind of the warnings and, whatever they've learned along the way to help them guide and navigate and make the best decisions possible. Well, that I think is where we wind up seeing that somebody will let it happen and nothing happened bad. So I can do that on the next class, and I can do that in the next class. And what happens is when we see instructors that have gone over a period of time without really digging into, more advanced topics or risk management or anything like that, they get complacent. You don't know what you don't know. And then the things that you are kind of gray on, it gets deeper shades of gray the longer they stay away from the knowledge of what they should be doing right. And I think that is a very dangerous, slippery slope that we have seen in our industry, massive payouts on the liability insurance side of the house that is claims-based. And these claims are coming and hitting our industry where there is, not a simple injury where normal insurance would be like, what, that really is a shame that happened. It's completely defined by the word accident. Nobody meant anything of this. And, too bad for both parties. And, maybe we can help with some of these costs or losses. That's one thing. And that's what insurance was principally about. what we're seeing now is egregious, massively egregious events that have taken place by dive professionals that have opened doors of not only negligence, but gross negligence. And the gross negligence gets the highest awards, the highest payouts in our industry. And that has been the thing that has hurt so many. It's hurt insurance carriers, it has hurt the dive professionals, and then it's hurt the dive professionals that are doing things right.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it reaches into my pocketbook and your pocketbook and everybody else that's doing it right. But that one event, that one instructor, that second instructor, that third, we don't have many claims, but the thing that we do have are some big ones. And guess what? That is the piece that how much more can we endure on these high costs on insurance in our industry with massive payouts? Why not go to the source of the problem? Why not address the negligence issues? That was why we wanted to come out and first hit it with, you've got to understand negligence, the actual legal definition of it. How can you be brought up on negligence? What does that look like? And what are the ways that that can happen? And then also by providing that kind of shot across the bow with, here's a scenario, here's what the payout was. Mm-hmm. Here's another scenario, here's what the payout was. Some of the scenarios too are not ridiculous. Some are, but some are just a little paying attention and that wouldn't have happened, or not doing it the way that you've seen it done before. And that's where it comes up, and that's where it comes out in cases. And that is the real eye-opener, is people don't get a chance to read the actual cases. They don't get a chance to see the depositions. Some of that is out there, but boy, to see that, you just get a sense of how brutal it is when you are under deposition justifying your actions. Mm-hmm. And that's what I try to do with my staff too, is to share with them, hey, look, if you did this in this scenario, what do you think? And they go down that little rabbit hole. And I say, now here's how that's going to go in front of an expert witness, in front of a litigation team that is going after you, and they're picking apart everything you did wrong. And then they're going to justify it by pointing to every resource that you've had from open water diver forward and saying, does it not say in this manual right there? Can you read that manual? That's how they do it. Yeah. And that's where it gets to the point where the insurance company just goes, yeah, we're going to pay out. Yeah. Instead of fighting and saying, no, we're going to take this all the way. And that's, a lot of times that doesn't get to happen because it's so egregious. And I think that if people understood that, there would be a bigger awakening to what can go wrong and how they can understand that system, that legal system of negligence, and what it looks like and how easy you could go into it, and to understand duty of care. People don't get duty of care exactly, That's right. And it's kind of like, well, does it work in this case? And when you start teasing people with the whole what ifs, they all of a sudden realize, I don't understand. Mm-hmm. I don't understand what my boundaries are in duty of care. Ooh, then you get the breaches of duty. Where is that coming from? And then how does that point back? And so when we look at damages, okay, what's a damage? And then to be able to explain that damage can be anything, but hey, it can also be psychological. Mm-hmm. So here's that person that left at sea, and now just their time left at sea, they can, be in an absolute anxiety for months, years later, and the payout is rich. And that other piece about damages is also where I think we get the opportunity to talk about the Divers Alert Network insurance, to be able to say that whether it's on a student or whether it's on the regular policy, here's how you're covered. But here's the other piece. You're the dive pro. And as a dive pro, if you understand damages, you understand that everything could have been perfectly fine and you did everything right as a dive pro and you love the student loves you. They now have a $15,000 medical bill.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to pay that?
Mm-hmm.
And they might not have that. And so that is precisely where some claims start and everybody's shocked. How did that happen? Everything was good and they got the treatment they need. Yeah, they can't afford that medical bill. So guess what? It's coming out of professional liability insurance, except for Divers Alert Network insurance. Nope, we require every diver to have that. We require every student to have the student insurance. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what level you're at. And that right there is just a wonderful thing that then people can understand the damages side of the house and how something like the DAN policy gets to mitigate that. And all of that combined was where we really wanted to start that risk management program, because it was planting the seeds of understanding about the bigger picture. And I just love that people have come up to me, so many times or written me or whatever and said, I learned stuff. I mean, these are 30 and 40-year veterans in the industry, and they're going, I learned stuff. And that's I think, the special thing. Is that's what continuing education is about. As dive professionals, we must be sponges. We have to soak in and continue to soak in. And this is just one of those areas. It's great to do technical diving and it's great to do free diving. And I'm going to be an instructor in this and an instructor in that. It's great. But boy, I can't think of anything more valuable than to go down the road of risk management awareness and give that training so that people can be safer as dive pros and then beget safer divers under them. Mm-hmm. That to me is huge.
That's great. I think when I think back in my instructor class and I think about when we covered liability, of course we covered it, of course we discussed it, yeah. But my mind was so much in the sponge of, I've got to learn the standards, I've got to learn how to train, I've got to learn how to, if I keep them safe, I don't need to worry about that liability stuff. And so, yes, I did the exam, I read the materials, and we talked about it in class, but it is not where I focused. Yeah. It's not where I put any of my focus because I was thinking about the in-water stuff that I had to learn how to do. So, I left my instructor class with very little focus on that. Yeah. And then I look through over the years, as you say, a lot of it is experience. Yeah. You've experienced things. And I look back at how I trained my first few classes and I've changed how I train. There's things I look at and I go, that's not how I train anymore. And I've learned I'm going to change my positioning. I'm going to change how many students I take in the water. All those things that you learn through experience. Yeah. The near misses that I've had, and I go, okay, well, I realize that this is something that happened. I'm going to make sure I do it differently next time. The real question is, how do we impart that up front? And really, scenarios are the interesting way to do that. Yeah. I think about, you talked about temperatures not in standards. What's hard is if you say this temperature is in the standards, the problem is you have a petite young gal is going to feel very different in even 84-degree water than somebody who's a different size and different physicality. So you as an instructor need to be watching that student on that day in that water. And that experience doesn't come instantly. So how do we bring that to the classes up front is something that I really want to work on and try and figure out. How do we do that to the instructor up front so they're not having to learn from experience and perhaps a very bad experience, not just a near miss or something that they recognize along the way?
That's right. Yeah. I look at it a couple ways. First of all, is if you have a mantra that we have within my dive program, and oh my gosh, I've had it since 1988. Your next class is always your best class. And if you take that to heart, what that means is there's always room for improvement. And we also do it by journaling. So in our shift reports at the end of every class, and I know places don't do this, but I want to encourage folks to think about this. If you do a shift report after every pool session, after every open water dive, for every class you do, and you put the criteria out there that says, who was here, students, who was this, what issues were there, it could be equipment issues. It could be this or that or the other thing, right? You make your nice list of all that. But the big thing is, what can we do to improve? Because if you have that mantra that is your next class is always your best class, it means that you're always improving. And that is a really rich thing. I've been doing this for a long time, and we'll have shift reports that come in from an instructor that is 6 months into their instructor. And they'll sit there and go, you know what? I think we should look at positioning the students differently underwater in the deep end because the water polo team was playing over here, or, a group of swimmers were distracting. So if we just turn, and then it's all of a sudden like, yep, makes sense.
Yeah.
On this particular night, on this particular time, we have to be aware of that. And then it becomes policy. And so as you start to do this, you start to craft something that is exquisite. Your training then becomes this beautiful model of excellence where students are really focused, the instructors are focused, and everything goes smoothly. And that does take time. So, like you're saying, in fairness, like you can give somebody like, here's the best tips to do it. They're focused more on, I just need to know how to get from A to Z in the right time frame, and they're not thinking that. The second area that I really lean into is the emergency action plans. And if you can go into a dive, whether it's confined or open water, and you can go into that with a full list that quantifies 3 distinct areas: identifying everything that can go wrong, mitigating the potential for those things to go wrong, and then the third one, if despite your best efforts something bad happens anyhow, you have totally prepared for how to handle it if it does go wrong. If you build an EAP based on those 3 areas, now you are studying ahead of time. And to get to what you were just saying, I would be able to fill out my EAP and then come to that bottom part there that says, what are we doing today and who are the people? And then I get to identify, today I've got a petite 13-year-old in my class. Okay, what do I need for that? Mom's got to be there. Okay, what else? Oh, wetsuit. Oh, we're going into the colder water. Yep, her body composition, her body type. We might need to change up our wetsuit today. On and on and on and on, right? It just gets you this awareness. And that is a wonderful thing to prep. And the emergency action plan helps that because it's not all about emergency, because it's all about everything that can go wrong. So that could even be the point of anxiety. So now on that trip today, we're going to go and the visibility is going to be bad. What's that going to do for some individuals? Some individuals are going to be fine and other individuals won't. And you've just been in a 200-foot plus visibility pool for your confined water training. Now you're going to the lake or the quarry. What's that going to look like? And then how are they going to respond? So of course, we can't remove the risk entirely, but what can we do to mitigate that? And that's where we start to talk about visualization techniques and here's what it's going to be like. But think about it in these terms. Remember, we talked about turbidity. It's only particulate in the water. It's the same water you were in before. And so you start to, really kind of focus on that way to help people. So yeah, can you train that in an instructor class? Probably not. Comes over time. But you can start by at least getting through those EAPs and starting a process that says, oh, last time we were here, this was an issue. I'm not going to go to that platform. I'm going to go to this platform instead. Or last time we took an open water class in 4-foot seas, it didn't go so well. We're going to be more conservative this time. Whatever that is for you, I think those are 2 ways that we can lean into just being a little bit more savvy as instructors before we engage in our training with our students.
Yeah, I love that. Having an EAP is so important. I'm going to tell a little story on myself.
Yeah.
When I did my dive master class, you have to do a dive briefing and do an EAP for your dive site. I copied a whole section out of the book. And I was in Illinois, and I had, you can call Channel 16, which is the U.S. Coast Guard. And I'd copied that into my plan in Illinois. The Coast Guard's not going to show
That's
up
awesome.
if I'm in Kankakee, Illinois.
That's awesome.
But I think one of the other things that I always try to encourage all my folks. So earlier today, I was just asked, okay, brand new divers, what do you tell them? And around safety. And one of the things I always want to say is, oftentimes you're nervous about something, but you're even more nervous to ask.
Yes.
And so you're on the boat and you couldn't quite hear what the entry was. Ask. Your ears hurt.
Yeah.
One of the most common injuries we have is ears are hurting.
Yes.
But why do they hurt? Well, everybody else is going down, so it must just be me that's screwing up. I don't want to let anybody know, so I'm going to force it. Yeah. I think it's the same thing in the instructor camp. We need to make sure our instructors feel like they have a mentor, a co-teacher, someone that they can go to and say on the side, hey, it seems like high seas today. What do I do different? Or the visibility's low. What do I do different? Yeah. And having someone that they feel comfortable asking in your area. And that's one of the things I always encourage every dive shop or every instructor to make sure they have is the ability to ask those questions. A newer instructor say, I don't have the experience. How do I ask the question instead of learning it myself when I'm underwater and going, I shouldn't have brought this many divers down. Yeah. So that's one of the things I'm always trying to impart on my instructors. Ask questions. Don't be shy. Don't worry about looking silly of asking a question. Yeah. It isn't worth hurting someone over feeling like you don't want to ask the question. Ask the questions.
That's right.
Ask the questions.
100%. I agree with that so much. And, sometimes people don't have that opportunity, really.
Right.
They were trained up and now they're going somewhere, or, they just don't have that mentor, or they took over a dive shop and they're the top people in that shop now. And who do they turn to? And, do they go to the training agency? Do they, sometimes it's more of a hassle and a bother, right, to do that, and they don't want to. Or they are concerned that they're going to look foolish. Like, maybe I should have known this, and they don't want to ask. So having that relationship and the freedom to ask is huge. To be able to just go after somebody and ask them questions that are pertinent to it. We have this whole piece where, we like to enable and empower our team. And, talking about, in my case, lots of Gen Z, so our Generation Z, teens and early 20s. And it's challenging for them to make decisions when you've got somebody that is more senior and the gray, way more senior. It's like they could be intimidated, let's say. We really try to break that down. And one of the ways we do that is that we say to all of our staff that we feel that we have confidently trained them up so well on the risk mitigation and management side of the house that they understand how to process the questions about what it is that they're maybe facing in a gray area of a standard or a particular day or something like that. And what we do is we tell them two things. Number one is that if you always err on the side of safety, we will always back you up. So if the boat is going out and the captain's like, nah, it's fine, and you've got your open water class and you're sitting there going, this is going to be a puke fest. They're going to have a bad experience, potential injuries with ladders. This is not the day. If you pull off the morning of the trip and we have to eat that price, we will. Because I want that instructor to feel so confident that they assessed all of the risk and made the right decision. Because remember, when we start to look at some of the academic side of the education that comes out of dive master and instructor, it clearly talks about the number one reason for diving incidents and accidents is poor judgment. And I always go straight to a scenario when we discuss that involves the bad judgment of an instructor. That instructor did a very bad judgment and wound up killing 2 other divers. And that scenario is a big eye-opener. But I tell it because I want that brand new dive master and that brand new instructor to understand that the seasoned boat captain might not be making the right call that day.
Absolutely.
Or a senior instructor trainer on the boat doing something might not be doing something right.
Yeah.
We are responsible for our own actions and what we can control. And that is where I empower my staff to be able to really focus on how will this play out. This is also where in our risk management program, we've got the whole kind of doctrine of asking the question, what would an expert witness say? So if you were to sit across from an expert witness in the diving industry, you know, a gray bearded, long-haired, skinny jean wearing dude that has been in the industry for far too long, and that person is sitting across from you as an expert witness in a case, what would that look like for you to say, well, I decided that it would be okay to do this and do that. If you think that that expert witness will agree with you 100% and high five you, go for it. If you think that that expert witness will go, I don't know about that, that should give you pause right there to question. And that pause is legitimate, and own that, because if you're pausing and you think someone else is going to pause in that, guaranteed a jury or others are going to look at that and be like, oh no, why'd you do that? So I love that whole piece. And I've had people use that and say, you know, here's where we were, this is what we were doing. And I just thought about what you said about being across from an expert witness in a deposition, or having to tell that and then have my deposition picked apart by an expert. They said it was very clear. It was very clear that I was going into an area that I couldn't defend, and I chose this choice. And bravo, you made the right choice. And so if we don't penalize people for doing the right thing because something went wrong, like we have to pay more money because the dive boat, you know, we breached our timeline, we couldn't get our refund, that's where it becomes an issue. We want people to feel the freedom of making the right call. And that is precisely where so many accidents happen, just like you're saying about equalization. The person just thinks they keep going, and they're hurting themselves. Nope. We've got to understand to make the right call is oftentimes it takes what we call managerial courage. It takes that courage to step up, even as a Gen Z instructor or dive master, and tell the customers that have been diving longer than you, the instructors on the boat that have more credentials than you, to tell them, no, this is not the right site for the current today. Remember, current isn't in the standard. No. It's within a reasonable, context of it, of course, but you've got to go down and make that call.
Right.
You're hooking off on that wreck. Do you know that the people will be safe on that dive, or won't they?
Right.
You get to make that call in that moment and then go up and justify your decision. You should never be scolded for making the air of safety. That's where we want people to be.
Yeah, and I think we always want to make sure that older instructor is comfortable with receiving feedback and receiving that. I think we were talking about it a few minutes ago, that there are times that you could say, okay, I've trained and trained and trained. I've done it like this for 30 years and I've never had an incident.
Yeah.
Or the complacency of getting a little bit less precise every time. So I'm curious, with your background, do you think it's more of a complacency, or is it a new instructor? Do you have a sense of where that comes from and how that works? You know what I mean? Is it
I do.
Typically more newer or complacency?
I truly believe it boils down to you don't know what you don't know. And what we're seeing coming out of instructor programs is not at the level of sophistication such as our risk management program. So our agencies have been very focused on the development. And of course, risk management is a part of it. I don't want to take that away from what agencies are doing. But they don't have the bandwidth within their training programs, protocols, and the materials that they're making to lean as heavily into risk management and safety as a safety organization like Dan. So it's packaged. It's not specialized. And because it's packaged, then it's just in with a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think that that's where there's a bit of a miss, is that we've got people that come out and they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And when you read some of the cases that are out there, you go, how? Mm-hmm. How?
As an experienced instructor, you go, who told them that was okay?
Exactly. And that's the thing. Someone didn't tell them. Someone didn't tell them that that wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And I believe it's because there's not a lot of time in. We have gotten to a very consumer-based, deliver it quick training model. And, Amazon Prime is awesome. I love it. I do it all the time. It's great. 2-day delivery and all. But we cannot treat a scuba certification card as a commodity, that the person is only going for that card and they're going to get it as cheap and quick as possible. This is what we're seeing. And then when we see the dive centers capitalize on that even more by saying we're going to use training as a loss leader to get you in the door so that we can make the money on equipment sales and travel and other things like that, that means that you have to water the training down and you find the free pool instead of paying for a rental so that you can get deeper water. No, you're going to go to the apartment complex that's 7 feet deep. Where's the great training for equalization and neutral buoyancy? These are the things that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And so as this is really in our industry, it starts to roll up, and the up is at the instructor level. And then the instructor really doesn't know what they don't know on many things because they just haven't spent the time in. And, there's people that can say, we don't have enough dives as a prerequisite. Maybe that's the thing. People need more dives before they can be a dive master or an instructor. Well, is that really the thing? Don't know. What about the qualifications coming in? What about the different programs? So if you look at it, truly look at it, there are, we can all use the term 0 to hero, right? So that 0 to hero thing, if you were to break it down by classes and you just took the diving out of it, the experiential side out of it, and you did classes, a person could literally go through Dive Master and Instructor and accomplish that within only a few months, going back to back to back to back to back. And so the buffer was, well, let's get more diving in between. I believe that's a noble effect, but I also believe that when you put the business side and monetize this type of 0 to hero thing, and not calling out any particular programs, but just a concept. If it's just jumping from the one to the other, it's really not about the development of the individual. It's putting an individual through a program. So in that, think about any other thing in life. Like if you took your, golf lessons or your karate or whatnot, you're going to have people that perform at one level and people that perform at a different level. And guess what? You get to keep coming back to get better and better and better till you finally achieve that level. In diving, we don't do that. We say we do it, but we absolutely don't do it. Why? Because Open Water Diver starts this weekend and it ends there. And the next one starts this weekend and ends there. And the next one starts this weekend and ends there. There's no room for that expansion of an individual to get better over time. And there are people that definitely need that. And when we look at the swim tests and people going through a swim test and you see the strong swimmers and the weak swimmers, it translates. The weak swimmers, the ones that are uncomfortable in the water and are not performing at a great level, they are usually the ones that are underwater struggling with mask clears and other things. And so that, I think, is a really important piece to pay attention to, that everybody is not created equal, but we're treating every scuba class equally. That's not how it should be. Now, if anybody came up with a model that made it all work and be successful, we'd all be very happy and we'd all be very successful. But that still is an issue with our industry. And it's still an issue that I think also hurts our industry in some respects, because that person was forced to go through a curriculum and a timeline that was about what the dive center wanted. It wasn't necessarily for them. And then what does the dive center do? Well, you can take extra sessions. You can take this. That's how we do it. That's how we have to do it in some cases. But how does that student feel?
Yeah.
They know they're behind the curve. They know they're holding up the class.
Absolutely.
It's just, they are not long for the sport unless you lean fully into them and be gracious and pour into them and, nurture them. Now they'll be your rock stars. They can even be your best dive pros because they can say, I struggled too. That's wonderful to see that happen. So
yeah, I think that's valuable. I think so. So our world right now is all about fast content.
It is.
Who reads long articles anymore? You read the title and you think you've got all the content already. So when customers come to us and say, I want to be an open water diver, they're going to ask for the quick content. And it really becomes every one of us helping to educate them that that's not how you learn scuba. Scuba takes time. It isn't I read the titles and I've got it all. That's just not the way it works anymore.
It's not the way it works, but here's the problem though, JoAnn, is that you go to the website of most dive centers and it's going to say right there, very clearly, you will be a certified diver in 3 days.
Yes.
They just made the claim. They just, there's no asterisk, And here's the problem. If you're not, you are the loser. You're the loser in the class. Sorry, you didn't make our 3-day cutoff. That's not fair.
No.
So, in my world, of course, I teach 15-week open water diver courses for academics. So people readily love to judge and be like, well, Tech, it's easy for you. Try doing what we've done. I've taught and I've done 3-day scuba courses. Hated every second of them. Because when you start with an academic program that develops people over time and really builds them up, and every pool session starts with skill variations and repeats from the previous session, and you really push into that, when you get to that 60-foot dive on top of a wreck and you're neutrally buoyant, we're in a current, you're at 60 feet, take your mask off and put it back on. And the students are like, this again? Exactly. That's what we want.
Exactly. The coolest thing is when you have a student who struggles on a skill and then they come back to the next session and it's more comfortable. You repeat it at the beginning and it's more comfortable. And then the next time they repeat it, it's more comfortable. And by the end, they are at that objective we were talking about earlier. The objective of, okay, my mask gets kicked off. Well, okay, fine. I'll fix it and go back to my dive. And that's how it happens, is you've got to give them the chance to get, not just meet the skill, but meet the skill to the point where they're so comfortable with it. It's absolutely comfortable. And I love that when we think about, going back to the concept of continuing education, that this isn't just for the new instructor. This isn't for the seasoned instructor. It's for everybody. How can we make a difference in the industry for all the instructors? It's a cool place to think we've got an opportunity to do.
That's right.
It's really cool. Feels good to feel like we're making a difference.
Yeah, you are. And the beautiful piece is just like anything else. Once somebody gets into a routine of something, they start to enjoy it more. So when we, introduce something that's new, that says, hey, we'd like you to go through this. Well, hey, wait, that stopped after I became an instructor. Well, when they do it, the amount of people that go, that was refreshing. I actually liked that. That's good.
I learned something.
You got another one coming out? That's the hook right there.
Yeah.
So as long as we are pouring in good, valuable information and wisdom to individuals at every level of dive professional, now all of a sudden they're looking at their profession differently. And I like that because I think it's important that we as dive professionals, of course, we've got this cool job, tons of vibe, and we love what we do, and we pee in what we wear, and we've got boogers all over
Is that something
our hair.
you were aspiring to when you
Yeah,
were a
right.
kid?
I mean, no, the thing is like we're kind of down to earth and crusty and cool and that kind of thing. We don't take ourselves that seriously. But at the same time, when you realize what you do to keep people safe and to manage risk, and you start to get aware that the human body was never meant to be underwater for prolonged periods of time, and we are going to lean in with technology and techniques to survive and enjoy that environment, that becomes pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then not only do we end with that, here's my scuba instructor card, but that is your license to learn. That is where you start to dig in. You start to realize how much you don't know when you're an instructor. And that's how the mentality should be once you get that instructor card. Like, really? I am now in charge of people? It's like when I had my first child, take him home from the hospital. And I'm sitting there like, y'all didn't test me. I mean, is somebody going to inspect my car to make sure I got the seat in right, the car seat in right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm given a human life.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, bye, have fun. I think once we realize the weight of being a parent, so similar to the weight of being responsible for people's safety underwater, it changes the way you view yourself as a professional.
Yeah.
And the more that you can get better and better and better at that, more on safety, more on managing risk, more on planning for emergencies, removing problems for emergencies, and then leaning into those students. What is their issue? What is their concern? And all the finesse that comes with it, my gosh. Then you can hold your head high and say, I'm a dive professional.
Right.
And you can go to a social and, say I'm a dive professional. I was just at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's place. Black tie event. I mean, political people everywhere. And, my wife gets the opportunity to say, oh, this is Dr. Heather Clark, clinical psychologist. Oh, what do you do? I'm a dive professional. The funny thing is, I get the better reaction, right? It's the best part. It's like, oh, really? And they talk to me more than her.
Yeah, of course.
They're afraid of the psychologist. They're not afraid of me. But anyhow, that's what I'm getting at, though, is that you can hold your head high and you can say, I'm a dive pro.
Right. Because
you generally are, and that, I think that's a special place to be. Really do.
Tec, thank you for joining me today. It's always fun to sit and talk with you. You and I are very similar in some of our ideas and some of the things. And so it's always exciting to me and I always inspiring. I get to learn new things and think of new ideas.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
It's made my day. That's awesome.
Good. Well, thank you all for joining us and come again for the next one.